Right, so in this 11th lecture on collective intelligence, we are now going to look more closely at how we can work with collective intelligence at microsystem level. The 10th lecture was about, leaders and organizations and their strategies in relation to this, but now we're going to try to combine our thoughts on collective intelligence and what we know about teams and team development. So I would say there's quite an agreement on how teams tend to develop over time. There's lots of different theories who have been looking at this, and they basically come up with the same ideas on how this development process, what it looks like. And I've tried to illustrate that here. You could say that I've been trying to relate what we know about microsystem development to microsystem collective intelligence. And there you can say that teams, when we start from the left where a team is formed, that's the first time people start working on this task and they meet each other and so on. So then we will have, of course, a focus on structure. People need to know what they're supposed to do, and they need to know more about each other, and they need to find their individual ideas around this and a commitment and so on. So this is a phase that is sort of very much recognized by its uncertainty. We don't know much, and of course that will influence the way we work. But it also means that from a collective intelligence point of view, you can fairly easy increase the performance level of the team just by giving it what it needs. It needs answers. So by providing a plan, objective, get the discussions going, start forming roles and so on, well, this team effort can start moving. You can get the momentum in becoming a team. But it's still, people, if you remember the influence of how our own discretionary behavior, our social relations and things like that, they cannot be developed just by adding structure. So you have an underlying process of people needing to sort of find themselves in this task. And if they manage to do that, or if they manage to find a reason to really become involved, engaged in this, then they have a chance to develop into the next phase. So not that I'm saying they have a chance to develop into the next phase. That doesn't come by itself. You can have teams that never develops to phase 2, but stay in this structure mode for their entire existence as a team. But the thing that happens if they move into phase 2, that we here call relations, is that people become committed enough to really want to do this, let's say, on a personal level. And the interesting thing is that what happens then if people really feel that I'm involved in this, I want this to succeed, or I think this is important, is that they start caring about each other in the team. They start noting what others do. They start thinking about whether people put in the same effort. They start thinking about things, who has the most influence and so on, which means that a lot of the focus of the team and the team members turns inwards. And this is, in a sense, you could say, a natural process, because if step 1 is about, relating to the task, understanding what it's about, and then making up your own mind that, yeah, I want to be part of this, then when it's at the moment you decide that this is important to you, that you really start caring about the other players, so to say, and the other players' skills, and whether they have the right roles and so on. So this is, in many models, this is called a conflict phase, or a phase where people start testing each other to see whether they think they have the right roles and so on. So that means it's not necessarily then a positive thing for the collective intelligence of the group, because they put, in a sense, less relative effort on the task and more on the team, so to say. Now, if they manage to come through this phase, they will develop to you could say, a higher level. And the simple reason behind that is, of course, that in such a process as the phase 2 relation process, they will get to know more about each other. Not necessarily in a nice way, but they still will end up, if they still feel that they're a team, the task is relevant, I want to be part of this after this process, they have more information on how they function as people, as persons in relation to each other. So they can start working at a higher level. We call that here phase 3 and 4 and the idea phase. Now they can really start developing and trimming their skills in relation to the task. And as I said, this is if they manage to come through this phase. But this is well-known development within teams, and we've sort of understood this, and it makes sense. But if you're an organization, then of course our point here is that we don't necessarily have to accept the level of this development. We probably have to accept the development in itself because it's a natural process. But maybe we can make people more skillful in dealing with this process so that we could end up with this. You can see I'm sort of illustrating this with different curves. If you had a team consisting of participants who were really skillful in creating a good team, then you would expect the highest level of these 3 curves. That means that they would have a high level of performance or collective intelligence independent of what phase they're in. And of course you can think about the opposite, that if you had less skillful, less motivated or whatever, worse players, so to say, you could end up at a lower level than the average curve, so to say. So this is a perspective that I think is important from an organizational point of view. You want to ensure that your organization has as high curve in this development as possible, because the process in itself has to do with people and how people relate, and has to, in some ways, has its has its way. So just to show you one well, not very unusual way how unfacilitated teams can develop, like we have today, that the structural phase isn't necessarily a problem if you provide the right structures, of course. Here's the leadership in the form of the leader has quite an important role, because most of the time it's this person who has to provide the structure for the group to work with itself as a group. But if teams then move into the second phase and start testing each other and questioning things, and questioning the leader, questioning each other, and so on, because it's a natural thing to try out the team, so to say. It often happens that the team, this is not a pleasant experience. I think it could be a scary experience, because ultimately it could mean that team members decide they don't want to be part of this, and things start falling apart, so to say. So when we have a sensitivity for this and feel that this might be the way things are going, teams may back down and move back. They stop testing each other. They stop sort of caring about this aspect. Now this is a problem, because if this happens to a team and they sort of move back to this more neutral, distant relationship to the task and the team, they will probably have certain areas that they don't want to talk about anymore. Those areas that were used when they were in phase 2, that triggered these awareness of different ideas and underlying conflicts and so on. Which means that if you end up with a team there, you could say it becomes like a handicapped team. There are certain things that are not allowed, or they won't allow themselves to talk about, which of course will have an impact on the team's ability to create intelligence if they sort of self-censor certain things. So that's another detail in this. But if we then relate in a simple way the model we were using with the 4 capabilities to this process, you can see that in phase 1 we suggest that since it's a dynamic process, you can never ignore any capability in any phase, but maybe the focus of the first phase would be on representation. And the reason behind that is that within the representation is all the knowledge that the team needs in order to understand itself in the situation. So you would perhaps focus on adding the obvious things for people to be able to coordinate themselves. What's the objective? What's the plan? Where do we report? What roles do we have? What am I supposed to do? And things like that. So that would be the focus, just to ensure that we have provide as many answers as possible of that early on. But then, if you then move into the second phase of relationship, of course, this means we would perhaps have our main focus on relationship capability. And here we can sort of provide tools for the group to get what it needs, because ultimately this is about knowing more about each other. It's our way of testing things to get information about each other and our capabilities and so on. That's the underlying process. And therefore, of course, if we provide tools for increasing our understanding of each other, that would help. It doesn't necessarily have to be complex. So, for example, letting the team or the microsystem have a process where they do more advanced self-presentations is a very effective tool in order to increase understanding of other participants. Another way could be to have formalized feedback sessions that follow they're facilitated in a certain way, so that it makes people a bit less uncomfortable with them and so on. But their purpose would be to start to initiate people giving each other more qualitative comments and communicating in a more qualitative way. Another tool that we use a lot in developing groups is, of course, to use different forms of personality models that can be used to explain. We can do them on an individual basis, and people can sort of tell the others in the group about their results, and you can have a look at the total setting of the team from this personality model and so on, which are just, tools for team development. They don't provide all the answers or anything, but they sort of help the team to work with their relationships and to understand each other. But then finally, if we manage to move through this phase, we would have a more capable team, which is why now we could sort of really use the capacity of the group in terms of knowledge, innovation, and things like that. So we would suggest that from then on, the team reflection capability is perhaps the thing that would be most useful to invest in, to ensure that we maybe even revisit some of the things that was presented in phase one, to see if we now, when we mobilized our brains and thinking systems and so on, can come up with better ideas or better understandings and so on. And that part of using people's thoughts and creativity, innovation, and things like that isn't possible until you've reached a certain level of maturity in the team, because how much you even try, you won't get the full capacity of people. So that's why you think reflection capability would be the thing to focus on at this more developed phases of the team. Right, so if we now summarize this, we can say the following then. Microsystems or groups tend to follow a certain pattern in their development. And previous research has identified, basically you could say, 4 phases, and here we point to 3 of them. The collective intelligence of microsystems tend to vary over the different phases. That's what I try to illustrate with the curve. Microsystems in different development phases need different priorities in if you're going to intervene or support the team in some way. So our suggestion is that in phase 1, the interventions would be about structure and prioritize developing a good representation so that people can relate to a good qualitative description of the situation, the task, the purpose and objectives, and so on. The second phase, interventions should focus on supporting the development of relations, because that's going to happen anyway, but you can help the format of this process. by giving, facilitating the process in different ways. And then phase 3 and 4, then you have a more capable team where you mobilized your knowledge resources, which means now is perhaps the time to really dig into the understanding of the task, the possibilities of new creative solutions, of innovative solutions, and things like that. So here we suggest that the priority is on reflection. But integration capability, which is, how do people, the individuals, the participants support this process, is something you have to prioritize in all phases. It's something you have to be aware of in all phases, because a team that only talks about its team characteristics and its team's results will be weaker than if you're also able to talk about, analyze, diagnose, and discuss individual performance within the team. Because if you think again about the sports metaphor and the football team, suppose you're a trainer and you never discuss the efforts of the individual players, that would of course make you much weaker as a trainer and much less give you much less chances of developing an efficient team. Now there will be a resistance to this in phase 1 and perhaps to a certain degree in phase 2 as well. But that is something you would have to work with as a facilitator or a leader. So that's it. Thank you.